Where'd you get those eyes?
What is the secret to what this thing is?
Hey, what's up guys? I want to talk a little bit more about Jeepers Creepers 3. Because after I uploaded my review, I started watching other YouTubers' reviews, and it got me thinking more about this movie. There's a whole bunch of topics I didn't touch on in my video, and I'd kind of like to talk about them now. I was watching this guy's review, and he was very upset at the movie because he came in wanting to see the creeper just slaughter everybody. He wanted to see gore, he wanted to see heads getting chopped off, limbs getting chopped off, and it didn't happen in this movie. And I didn't really notice this because I didn't go into this movie looking for gore. I didn't come into the movie looking for the creeper just to go on an all-out rampage killing people. That's not what I was there for. I was looking for the atmosphere of the movie. I wanted to match the first movie and the second movie. I was looking at the way the creeper acted and how he interacted with everybody else and how his character was. Did he play the character of the creeper as well as he did in the first two? Which, to be honest with you, the atmosphere of the movie was pretty piss poor compared to the first two. And the way that he acted was actually pretty piss poor. But I'm going to talk about that later on in the video. For now, I want to talk about the killings, the deaths that were in this movie. And he was actually pretty correct. A lot of the deaths in this movie are just whoo, the creeper swooping in and then going off frame. Whoo, doing that kind of stuff. There's a lot of that in this movie. There's a lot of killings going on that are not seen on screen. Kind of like those old low-budget classical films that you used to watch where you would see somebody going in for the kill and then it would jump to another cut and then you'd hear someone scream. That's pretty much what happened in this movie. Most of the time there was not actual screen time used for the killings. Where in the first movie you saw heads get chopped off. You saw stuff like that. But in this movie there wasn't a whole lot of it. And it's kind of crazy because he had a whole armory of weapons. He had a whole truck full of weapons in this movie, and they didn't really use any of them. Granted, they did. He did throw a lot of his ninja stars. He did have his axes. He did have the javelin that he was throwing. He did have the knife that shot out of his truck and stuff like that, but still, there was a whole bunch of weapons, and they weren't used. It could have been a glorious, display of gore and limbs getting chopped off and everything else. But it just wasn't there because the budget wasn't there. I mean, that's the only thing you can assume. The budget wasn't there. And it's kind of upsetting. Again, it's not as upsetting as all the other elements that are missing from this film, but it's still upsetting when you actually dig down and think about it. So that's, one thing that I'd like to talk about, And if you guys agree, why do you think they don't have that in this film? Was it because of budget reasons? Or was it just because of a film kind of filmmaking technique that they're trying to pull off with it? It doesn't make sense to me. It definitely has to be a budget reason, you know what I'm saying? But it's hard to believe because I'm trying to figure out where their budget went. Because another thing that people were talking about was the fact that the creeper was always out in the sunlight. And I talked about this myself in my review. There's so many shots, the majority of the movie is taken during the day. Apparently in the very beginning of the movie, it was nighttime. And I guess it was very dark. You couldn't see anything. I came into the movie a little later. It was when the credits were pretty much over for the very beginning of the movie. So I didn't actually get to experience this. But apparently it was very, very dark in the beginning where they didn't have good lighting. And that's because of budget purposes. Clearly because if you're trying to shoot something at night, you need a really good lighting setup. Some very expensive lighting setups to make it actually look good. And a lot of people were complaining that they couldn't see anything. So that tells me the reason why they went with a daytime scenario for the rest of the movie is because they didn't have the budget to shoot it at nighttime. So they didn't have the budget to shoot it at nighttime. They didn't have the budget to have people getting killed on screen. They didn't have the budget to do practical effects. A lot of things were CGI. A lot of people were complaining about the mines coming out of the car being CGI. And a lot of the crows being CGI. To be honest with you, it didn't bother me too much. There's a couple areas in the movie, like I said, with the flipping cars and stuff that look really cheesy to me and I could tell was CGI. But a lot of the other stuff didn't bother me too much, but it seems to have bothered a lot of other people. But it goes to tell you that they used a lot of CGI in this movie as well. So it's like, where did their budget go? That's what I'm trying to ask. Like, where were they investing their money if it wasn't invested in any of those three categories? Like, I don't understand. And another thing is The guy that played the Creeper, he did such a phenomenal job in the first two movies. I actually watched a documentary of the first movie that showed his actual footage of him auditioning for the part, and he played it phenomenally. I mean, he got right up in their faces, he was smelling them, he was acting like a barbaric, wild animal, and he talked so highly of himself in the interview after the movie. If you stayed after the credits, most of the people in my theater left. But I knew there was going to be something at the end because I'd read about it. But in any case, he talked so highly of the fact that he was able to get right back into character again and hone in on who the Creeper was. But I didn't really see it that much in this movie. I mean, to be honest with you, he didn't play the Creeper nearly as good as he did in the first two. I mean, it's kind of like they had a list of things that he needed to do. Make sure you smell things was one of the things on the list. You know what I mean? So that they checked that off. They're like, okay, he's smelling things, and they just accepted it. It's like they set the ceiling so high in the first two movies that they weren't able to reach it this time around. And they were pretty much just doing a generic, quick revision of what they needed. They just went down the list and like, boom, 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 we need these things, and that was it. But there was no thought behind it. There was no real reasoning behind it. And they didn't actually elaborate on those things. Because if you watch him, he just doesn't act like the Creeper in this movie. He doesn't actually have that sense of creepiness, that sense of being like a wild animal that's just out there to hunt people for their prey. Because he's supposed to be scaring these people. I was watching another review and people were talking about how he wasn't invoking fear in people like he was in the first two movies. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to pull forth the fear from people, and he played with them. He played games with people. He'd stick his tongue out. He'd lick the windows. He would smell things in such a weird, creepy way, and it just wasn't in this movie. He just didn't play the part like he was supposed to, and it's not to knock him, but it's just upsetting. There's another thing. I mean, it's upsetting to me, and I don't know why he would talk so highly of himself, but then not act the part, not actually, the proof is in the pudding, and clearly he didn't do it as good of a role as he could have, and I don't know if it's just because of budget reasons again, if it was time restraints, if it was the storyline itself just didn't, open up enough for him to interact, because again, when I was watching the documentary, they were talking about him, the director, and Salva, he was a very cool guy. From what I gathered from the documentary, they talked about how he was willing to work with the actors and allow them to improvise and to create a better character. And it just didn't seem like there was any of that in this movie, and I don't understand why. Time restraints, budget restraints. I mean, what was the purpose? Why did they take out that real element from this movie? Because that's what made the original movies so good. That and the atmosphere, the dark, creepy atmosphere, and just the way that he carried himself. I mean, that's what was most important to me. If he would have nailed that like he did in the first two movies, they could have formulated the actual shots around that and the storyline and the settings around that, and it could have been just a mediocre filler of a movie where they were just slaughtering people for no reason, and I would have been fine with it. But the fact that it was missing all those elements, the fact that they lied about actually having some kind of origin to the Creeper and then not actually giving you an origin, they had these people find things out about him, but then they never tell anybody about it and they just end up dying or just walking away with the information, not using it for any real purpose that actually helps them. I mean, there's so many things in this movie that could drive you crazy when you actually think about it. It's like, what are they doing? Like, I don't understand how they can go so awry. You know what I mean? It's like, didn't anyone sit down and go, okay, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense, this is going to piss fans off, this is going to piss fans off. Did anybody do that? Did they do any actual revisions to the story, to the script, to the ideas that they were putting down on paper? Or did they literally just go, fuck it, excuse my language, we're going to take it, we're just going to shoot it? I don't understand. It's like none of the gold, none of the actual, thought process that they put behind the first two, none of the actual work, real gritty, down to earth, let's make this movie make sense. Let's actually, put everything we got into this movie. None of that seems to be evident in this movie. It's kind of like they just threw it out there just for throwing it out there to try to reboot the series or something. I don't know if they're just doing that just to get it out there and then they plan to do a better job in the next one, or is it just the route that it's going to go, from here on out? That's what scares me. If they even get a chance to make another movie, is it going to be just like this one, or are they actually going to hit a home run? Because now you're losing fans. Now you're pissing people off. And that's what scares me, is that you can go this deep down the rabbit hole, give fans, two phenomenal movies and then turn around and release this junk after, people been waiting 14, 15 years for this movie. I mean, it's just such a letdown. And the more I watch these reviews, the more and more I started to not like this movie. The more imperfections and problems I've seen with it. There's a lot of problems within the movie itself that don't make sense. There's a scene where they shoot the knife out of the truck and they hit the guy in the dirt bike and it looks like it travels like hundreds and hundreds of yards, and then the next scene, it's not even that far away. It's like less than 50 feet away from the truck. Like, there's so many like weird things like that, that you watch, but you don't necessarily take in. Like the fact that the creeper doesn't have brown eyes, like he's supposed to, because he just got done eating Derry's eyes right before this movie at the end of the first movie. It's something I didn't really notice, and a lot of people aren't going to notice. But it's those kinds of things. It's like, why didn't you think of that? Why didn't you do that? Why wasn't there somebody there, to go, oh, hey, he needs to have brown eyes. Oh, hey, this, we just showed a scene of this thing shooting out this many yards. Why is it only this far now? Why is this window clean when it was just bloody? Why is he not acting like the creeper would? Why is this not shot in a dark, creepy atmosphere? If you have to shoot him in daytime, at least make him seem hidden. Put the hat down, put his eyes underneath his brim, make him harder to see. When you have him out there in the limelight and he's just shining in the sun, he doesn't look nearly as creepy. Why does he have a red shirt all of a sudden when he didn't have a red shirt before? It's all of these things that just combine together that just tear the movie apart, and it just makes you go, well, this is a shitty movie. And there's so many people that are calling this an absolute abomination. They're not even accepting this as a Jeepers Creepers movie. And again, I still want to say this is a decent movie, but I'm not liking it as much as I did when I first came out of the theater. The more and more I think about it, it is seriously a letdown. It really is. For all of these reasons, and many more reasons I haven't even talked about. And again, you can go on and on. I could probably make 5 more videos about this and keep coming up with new ideas and new things and why the movie's not good. And I try to come up with as many positives as I can, but there's only so many to give because there's so many more problems with it. But, I mean, what do you guys think? I'd like to have some discussions with some real diehard fans in this movie because, I don't want to see this movie die. I don't want to see the franchise die. And a lot of people are like, this ruined Jeepers Creepers for them. I'm not a believer in movies ruining past movies that were already made and set in stone. I'm always a believer in, make another movie. I don't really care even if it's just thrown out, with a low budget. They don't really put a whole lot behind it. At least they're making stuff. At least they're trying to make stuff. And I'm always an avid person for that kind of stuff. But it is upsetting, especially when you've been waiting so long for something. You know what I mean? I mean, at least finish the story. Finish the arc of this timeline. And then you can go back and screw around with it and make, shitty spin-offs or whatever if you want to. But right now, it's not the time to be playing with this movie. You need to be doing your job and making a good movie. So Victor Salva, why is this such a failure? Why did you take this in such an odd, weird direction? And why didn't you pay attention to any of the details? Why didn't you go back in and flesh things out more smoothly instead of just leaving this it's like being a sculptor and just having a block of clay and then just roughly sculpting something out and then just going, it's good, put it in the art show, put it in the museum.